Throughout history, there's always been those polarizing figures that we love to hate, and we hate to love. There's no place where these types of figures come out more than in the world of sports, especially in the National Basketball Association, or the NBA. Have you ever watched a game and saw a player that you just knew that you would not like, but yet every time that he was on the court or you heard the announcers call his name, you found yourself paying attention to him? Or later, when he's on the news and you find yourself gaining interest in what they're saying about him. Why do you care? If you don't like him, what does it matter? There are many explanations for this type of phenomenon, but we first have to understand what it is that we don't like about these players and why we care about them being talked about. The aspects that we're going to look at are the theories behind deviance and norm violations, and then we're going to relate them to the NBA. We're also going to explore some examples of breaching experiments and the works of comedian Andy Kaufman to help understand what it is we don't like about these players and why they stand out to us. Then we are going to jump into Carl Jung's shadow theory and discuss how the media and gamecast announcers play a role in our shadow figures and how we relate that to the players that we don't like. Throughout this whole process, we'll be attributing the aspects that we're talking about to a handful of NBA players, coaches, teams, and administrators who are perceived to be disliked or hated. One of the primary aspects that we're going to be looking at is the aspect of norms, norm violations, and deviance. Now, norms are the culturally accepted rules of behavior, or the code of conduct, if you will, and these norms lead to values. These norms and values are socialized over time to the culture that they affect. Because we live in America, we hold American norms and values, and we don't take kindly to when people break those norms. Now, one of the values that Americans hold dear is the value of hard work. Now, because of this particular belief, American society does not look highly upon people who are lazy or don't work as hard as they should. This is also one of the most important beliefs in the NBA. Hard work is one of the most important values that the NBA looks for in its players. And players who do not live up to this belief of hard work are usually blackballed from the league and shunned by their fellow players, coaches, and administrators, as well as the fans of the league in general. Now let's take a look at some of the players who are notoriously known for being lazy and don't put in the work.
Kwame Brown is gone. The City of Angels, Hollywood, just should be celebrated. Throw a parade already, whether you win the championship or not. This man was a bona fide scrub. He can't play. No disrespect whatsoever, but I'm sorry to tell everybody the truth. The man cannot play the game of basketball. He has small hands. He can't catch the ball. He's got bad feet. He can't really move, even though he's mobile. Doesn't really know what he's doing. Doesn't have a post move that he puts to memory that he can do 2 times in a row. He has no game whatsoever, plays no defense, doesn't have the heart, the passion, or anything that comes with it. And you're asking me whether they gave up too much? Please, the Los Angeles Lakers knew exactly what they were doing.
It's easy to sum it up when you just talk about practice. We sitting here, I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice.
The NBA has its own set of norms and values that everyone in the league is expected to adhere to. These norms and values are both the written rules of the game and the unspoken rules that players universally adhere to. An example of these norms is the concept of professionalism both on and off the court, and that there is to be a mutual respect between all the players in the league, regardless of whether or not these players like each other or not. The violation of these norms can result in punishment, such as fines and suspensions for these players. The consistent violation of norms is known as deviance. Emil Durkheim studied deviance and claimed that it was a normal part of the social organization. In many cases, deviance is defined as a nonconformity to the norms and values of a large group or community within a culture. If the deviance persists, the individual may be subjected to being an outcast and potential banishment from the group by the other members. Now, you're probably wondering how this concept of deviance and nonconformity relates to the NBA. Well, players who are in the NBA are expected to adhere to certain guidelines, and if they don't, they get punished for it. So a nonconformist in the NBA may not adhere to, say, the dress code or the rules of fair play. Players like this will then get a reputation around the league, and teams may not sign them, players won't want them to be on their team, coaches won't want to coach them, simply because of the headaches that are involved with coaching players like that. Now let's take a minute and see if we can think of any players that might fit this mold. Did you think of players like Charles Barkley, Lance Stevenson, Bill Laimbeer, even Ron Artest or Latrell Sprewell? Let's take a minute and take a look at some of their game films, and you can see why these players have this type of reputation.
Barkley on the recovery, stopped by Ewing, and then put on the floor by Oakley, and Barkley goes at Oakley. Oakley missed with a swing. Barkley tried to go back at him, and they're separated.
Shot blockers. Artest drives and finishes. And the Laker crowd fired up, and a shot that's Harden goes down.
And World Peace elbowed him.
Oh no, Ron Artest was squaring off with Serge Ibaka. Or World Peace, I should say.
Quarter, Jordan drives, and Rick Mahorn followed a Piston credo. No layups. But the Bulls enforcer, Charles Oakley, wasn't pleased.
We got a fist fight now.
It wasn't like I was trying to hurt him. I was like, oh, forget it. And I just knocked him down, and next thing you know, Doug Collins jumps on my back.
Mahorn would have to shed Collins a second time before it was over, and he and Oakley got ejected. Jordan went on to score 36 and a 60.
Now, when we left off, we were getting into how deviants are controlled by their groups. This is done in the NBA through the commissioner.
The commissioner hands down punishments for players who continuously break the rules of the league, and they are controlled through the fines and suspensions that come from their actions.
Now, there was a time in the league when a deviant-based and nonconformist culture tried to take over the league. And the poster children for this movement in the league was the Bad Boy Pistons of the late 1980s and the early 1990s. This team was everything that a deviant player and nonconformist team should look like. Let's take a look and see why.
Here's the thing that people do not want to admit. The Pistons in 1989 and 1990 were the best team in basketball. I don't care how physical they were, how mean they were the best team.
This was a very physical basketball team. When they came onto the court, they were intent on winning.
Up to Billy, he'll square up and gun left wing. It goes!
They were hard-working, took absolutely no prisoners, really didn't care who they upset, pissed off, whatever.
But the biggest problem was Detroit Pistons. They kicked their ass.
I think a lot of times teams would get on the court and feel defeated before the game even started because they went, oh my God, if something bad happens, they're just going to kick our you-know-what.
And most teams can't play that way. So when they tried to play that way, they were already beat. We'd shut teams down, period. That's what we do.
And it's Rodman operating a great offensive rebounder, taken down at the end line, and now punches exchange.
We knew when it was a man down, team got up.
I mean, the name just kind of came along with it, the bad boy name, and then we just rolled with it.
There is a silence knocked down by Laimbeer.
Now that we have looked at theories for norm violation and deviance, let's take a look at breaching experiments and see how people have gone on to further study norm violations. So you're probably wondering, what is a breaching experiment? A breaching experiment is an experiment that seeks to study and examine people's reactions to the breaking of generally accepted norms, and this is done in the fields of psychology and sociology. These experiments involve the conscious behavior that violates a generally accepted norm, and the goal is to observe the social reaction to that behavior. The theoretical groundwork for breaching experiments was laid by sociologist Irving Goffman. However, breaching experiments is generally associated with ethnomethodology, which is the work of Harold Garfinkel. Garfinkel expanded on Goffman's ideas and developed them into a qualitative research method. One of the primary users of norm violation and breaching experiments was comedian Andy Kaufman. Now, even though he was not a sociologist, he used norm violations and types of breaching experiments to create his own unique style. He then used this style to challenge the norms of society and push them to previously unseen limits. Now let's take a look at some of his material and see how he pioneered breaching experiments and norm violation into comedy.
Irrepressible Andy Kaufman.
Kaufman was known for doing outlandish things that he used to make people uncomfortable, but yet also make them laugh at the same time.
Andy Kaufman, ladies and gentlemen. Good luck to you, Andy. Thank you for stopping by. Andy Kaufman. Okay, Andy, thank you very much.
The next aspect that I want to explore is the idea of why do we care about this stuff? Why does the media care what a guy wore to a game or what player does what? Why do you care that a player that you don't like is being talked about? In order to better understand this, I think we need to take a look at Carl Jung's shadow theory and the idea of the shadow concept. The figure that's known as a shadow that Carl Jung refers to is very similar to the unconscious that Sigmund Freud talks about in his works. Carl Jung breaks the shadow down into two aspects. Those aspects are that the shadow is an unconscious aspect of the personality that the conscious ego does not identify with, and that the shadow is the entirety of the unconsciousness. The first aspect of the shadow is considered to be largely negative because people tend to reject or remain ignorant of the least desirable aspects of their own personalities. Jung also states that everybody has a shadow, and that the shadow embodies everything, including the positive and the negative aspects outside the light of the conscious mind. Because of this, the less a person embodies their shadow in their lives, the denser and blacker that shadow will become. Now, because of this aspect, people will tend to look at their own perceived inferiorities and project them onto another and recognize them as a perceived moral deficiency in another person. When this happens, it is known as psychological projection. These projections can remain hidden, but when that happens, the projections insulate themselves and harm a person by acting as a veil that is consistently thickening with illusions between the ego and the real world. Now that we have examined Carl Jung's shadow theory, let's apply it to the NBA. And why we and the media care about what a player does or why we may not like a particular player. Sportscasters and announcers have a lot of influence in this area. They can tend to throw in their own biases and prejudices without even meaning to. And when something happens in a game, they can either report on it a lot and cover it a lot and blow it out of proportion, or they can just tell the audience exactly the information that they need to know and leave it at that. This can have a large impact on how we think about and perceive certain players and teams. Now let's take a look at an incident that happened in Detroit between the Detroit Pistons and the Indiana Pacers that will forever go down as the Malice in the Palace.
Intelligent game tonight. Then Wallace is fouled, and Wallace did. Wallace right at our chest. This has potential to be serious if they don't get between. Wallace upset. Players trying to hold each other off. Steven Jackson and Rasheed Wallace trying to be peacemakers. Now Jackson yelling. Wallace still going. You need the coaches in there to get him away. Go. That's not that hard of a foul. It's not a normal foul, but not that hard. And Ben Wallace can't react that way. Sure. He'd have to walk past the Pacer bench to go. Now Artest has jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench. Artest is in the stands. Oh, this is awful. Fans are getting involved. Steven Jackson's in the fans. Rasheed Wallace going into the stands.
After further review, I still think they are. Although not all fans, those that were involved in this, those that came on the floor, guys, and it escalated when the fans get involved.
Well, there's no question. One thing that people don't understand, when you're involved in a rivalry like this, where the emotions are running at an all-time high, you have adrenaline flowing, and especially when fans are the ones who instigate these types of altercations. A player, in essence, is looking for an opportunity because they dealt with so much ridicule from these fans.
This incident had deviance and norm violation written all over it. Several players broke the rules of the league by fighting with each other as well as entering the stands and engaging the fans. This brawl was unlike anything the league had ever seen, and in this case the players definitely broke
both the written rules of the game and the unspoken guidelines for the players.
Now, the amount of media attention that incident received blew the entire thing out of proportion. Yes, there were players who were fined, and yes, there were players who were even suspended for that altercation. But because of all that media attention, people projected their shadows onto players like Ron Artest because he had the courage to fight back.
The shadow theory will indicate that a person who projects their shadow onto another person, like Ron Artest, will do so because they do not possess that quality of fighting back themselves. Because of this, they will demonize him for his actions. On the other hand, they could have that aspect of themselves and they reject it. Because of this, they will scrutinize him for being able to fight back.
Now, fighting back is not the only aspect that people worry about. There are lots of other aspects of our personalities that we may or may not like, so we project it onto other people when we see that aspect in their own personalities. Now, the poster child in the NBA for this is Dennis Rodman. Throughout Rodman's career, he was always challenging the norms, being deviant, and not always following the rules. People thought of him as a dirty player, but they also loved him for his hard-nosed talent. But no matter what your stance on him, you paid attention to him, and the media paid a lot of attention to him because he was just such a phenomenon. Let's take a look at just a few examples of the phenomenon that was Dennis Rodman.
Rodman rebound, timeout Chicago. And Kersey knocks the ball away. Be careful. Here comes O'Neal.
In Rodman's case, Young's shadow theory
is a great method of explaining why the media and so many other people paid attention to him. Whether they loved him or whether they hated him, they still cared and wanted to see what he was going to do next. Now, norm violation and deviance are two things that have become very common in the NBA over the years. The players are consistently challenging the accepted norms and both the spoken and unspoken rules of the league. The most recent player in the league that has gotten a lot of scrutiny for his antics on the court is Lance Stevenson. He has faced a lot of scrutiny from the media, other teams, and the fans for some of the things that he has done. There are people who love the way he plays, and there are people who hate the way he plays the game. But either way, he gets a lot of attention, and they will examine every move that he makes on the basketball court. Once again, shadow theory is a great tool to explain why Lance Stevenson gets so much attention for his antics on the court. A person may look at him and see an aspect that they do not possess in their own personalities, and so they are glad that someone else has the courage to challenge the rules of the establishment. On the flip side, they may see that aspect of his personality and not like it because they themselves have that same aspect and they don't like it either, so they demonize him for it. Either way, their shadow is being projected onto Lance Stevenson. Each of these theories helps explain why we, the fans, care about these players who are considered to be dirty, lazy, nonconformist, or simply players that we just don't like. So the next time that you're watching a game and you see a player that you don't like, stop and think. Is he really a bad guy, or is he embody something that you don't like about your own self and your shadow? Either way, I'll see you out there, and thanks for joining me today.